I'm going to recap the only upset in Division I women's basketball, and it involves the Big 12. It's not Oklahoma. It's not that game. They survived Kansas State, and they went to overtime, and they won 90-86. They nearly lost in regulation at home, but it's not them. In fact, it is Iowa State, who is number 23 in the country. They lost to Kansas. That was on the first 4 buys, according to the latest bracketology. Maybe it could have changed by now. But either way, a team that's on the bubble and need to secure themselves an NCAA tournament spot, I think they're in for sure. Because the final score was 98-93. Kansas had a 26-19 lead after the first quarter. Second quarter, both teams scored over 20 points. I mean, Iowa State with 24, Kansas with 22. Third quarter, Kansas owned slightly 24 points to 19. But the third quarter, Iowa State scored 31 points, and they rallied back, but they allowed 26. And remember, they have the best player of all time in that program in Ashley Jones, and this year's not been the year. She came back probably just to win the Big 12. She ain't going to do it in the regular season. I mean, that's the truth. And granted, there was a little bit of a foul, not really a foul game until late, because it was down to 3 points a few times, 2 times down the stretch. But then they had to commit 3 fouls in a row just before they get to the free throw line. Kansas only made 1 out of 2, but then Iowa State got the rebound. They called timeout. They missed a layup. They got the offensive rebound, and they made a layup with 19 seconds left or something like that. Kansas called timeout. There was a foul, and then Kansas made both their free throws. They're up 4. Yeah, and from there, Iowa State missed a layup. Kansas got the defensive rebound. They had to foul. They shot 2 more free throws. But at that point in the game, it was 97-91. It was out of reach. Iowa State made a layup with around 2 seconds left. And of course, they did foul. Iowa State did foul again, and Kansas only made 1 out of 2. But by that point, it was game over. They should have let the clock run out. But you know what? It just shows how much they really wanted to win. Iowa State didn't shoot the ball bad, because it was 48.4% from the field, 21 for 64 overall, 11 for 27 on threes, 40.7%. 20 for 22 on free throws, 90.9%. 38 rebounds, 10 of those offensive, 16 assists, 2 steals, 1 block, 8 turnovers, 23 fouls, only 11 points off the bench. And Ashley Jones, without her, they only have 60 points. Just 60. They had another player with 26 points from Danae Fritz. So, yeah. It just shows their offense was good enough, but the defense, horrific. I mean, Kansas shot 51.5% from the field, 34 for 66 overall, 11 for 20 on threes. They only made 19 out of 25 on free throws. It could have not been as close. I mean, 32 rebounds, 8 of those offensive, 17 assists, 4 steals, 6 blocks, 6 turnovers, 20 fouls. Well, the good news is there's only 1 more conference game left for both of these teams before the Big 12 tournament. Iowa State has Texas Tech. That's 18-12, and they're on the bubble. They're not really the first 4 out, but nor the next 4 out. They're probably the next. They have to be aware of that game. They have to. And they have to win that game. For Iowa State does, in order to give them such a shot to 3rd place. But here's the trick. And Kansas has to go on the road to TCU. And that's the last game for Reagan Peebly as a head coach in that building. So motivation is going to be there for sure. Not to say Kansas doesn't. It's just, I'm telling the truth. And Kansas does not need to have a bad loss. They got the quality win. Just avoid a bad loss. And I'm going to go over the standings in the Big 12. Obviously, Texas is 13-4. Oklahoma's 13-4 too. But Texas swept them twice. But if Oklahoma would win against Oklahoma State on the road and Texas loses somehow to Kansas State, Oklahoma wins the Big 12. But after that, even if Texas wins, they own the edge over Oklahoma. They swept them. I mean, it's their conference this year, unless proven otherwise. And somebody made a comment of volleyball won Big 12, and women's basketball was going to win the Big 12. It's not a for sure thing for the women. It's not for sure thing. There's a one scenario that they couldn't. Texas couldn't. It's simple. They lose to Kansas State, who is on the bubble, while Oklahoma could win. After that, yeah, it's Texas's. And yes, Texas volleyball won not only the Big 12, but the NCAA tournament. I just think that person didn't want to remember what happened in that game against Baylor recently. I just believe that. And it just shows how insecure that person is. Yeah, I'm not going to list that name. You know who I'm talking about when you look at the comment. Oklahoma State 10-7. Iowa State 10-7. Baylor 10-7. West Virginia 9-8. Kansas 8-9. Texas Tech 6-11. Kansas State 5-12. TCU 1-16. But there is tiebreaker rules. There are tiebreaker rules if it comes to that. I would assume Kansas would win over TCU, and I'm going to also assume somehow Oklahoma beats Oklahoma State on the road, and Baylor wins against West Virginia at home. Then it becomes a little bit interesting. Of course, if Iowa State would lose too, then Baylor would automatically go up to third in the Big 12 automatically. But I'm not going to assume they're going to lose that game. If it involves two teams, which is probably going to be the case between Iowa State and Baylor, and then West Virginia and Kansas, because there's no way, that's the only two ways ties, and of course maybe up top as well at the 1 and 2 spots. I'm not going to go over that real fast. And since it's just involving two teams only, I'm not going to go over more than two teams in this scenario. First, the results, first part, which is the most important, results of head-to-head competition during regular season. If it remains tied, then it goes down to all these scenarios. Of course, we know if Texas would win and Oklahoma would win, Texas owns them head-to-head, 2-0, then Texas wins the Big 12, then Oklahoma goes down to 2 in the Big 12 for the seeding part. Now, as for the other parts, the first thing is each team's record versus the team occupying at the highest position in final regular season standings, and then continuing down until one team gains an advantage. When at a group of teams, while compiling records, use each team's record against collective ties as a group, rather than the performance against the individual tied teams. This lone instance to this guideline would be if there are two tied teams in a group placement and one of them won both regular season games. In this instance, the tie is deemed broken in comparison of the seed rather than placement will be utilized. Now, the second scenario is a comparison of the tied teams' conference games only road record. I definitely know if Baylor wins against West Virginia, and even if Iowa State would win and Oklahoma beats Oklahoma State, Baylor has a better road record than Iowa State does. Baylor owns the edge. It's just the first one, it's a little interesting because both teams did lose to each other. Baylor and Iowa State, and same thing goes for Kansas and West Virginia. It's just who's going to own that edge. I definitely know in the Baylor scenario, I would think the first scenario favors Baylor, but I could be wrong. But either way, if they win and Oklahoma would win over Oklahoma State, then Oklahoma State would drop down to a 5. Okay, the third scenario is a comparison of the tied teams' conference-only road games while occupying at the highest position in the conference regular season standings, and then counting down through the standings until one team gains an advantage. When arriving at a group of tied teams while comparing records, each team's record against the collective tied teams as a group prior to that own tie-breaking procedure rather than individual performance against the two teams. The lone exception to this guideline would be if there are two tie teams and one of the teams won both regular season matches. Of course, if you swept the team, yeah, it doesn't really matter. I do know that Oklahoma State beat Baylor twice, so maybe that comes into play. Maybe, but maybe not. I don't know. So, yeah. And of course, if it's a draw, in the event of the tiebreakers procedures are unsuccessful and the draw is necessary, it could be the following procedure will be used. The draw will be conducted in public or with media attendance. That's the first part. Institutions involving in the draw have the right to have a local representative in attendance at the drawing. And third, and the final one, a single slip of paper for each institution with name or logo will be placed in a container and will be drawn in order of seating from highest to lowest. So it does complicate things in the Big 12 if there is two-way ties. Of course, just imagine the three-way ties. It would be even crazier. So, anyways, if you like this content, like and subscribe, and see you guys later. 5 subscribers are on the road to it. Let's go.